Welcome back. You're watching Creative Cooperative Kids, and I'm your host, Bill Corbett. My oldest daughter is the proud mom of my two grandchildren, and she thought she had it somewhat figured out as a parent after her firstborn had gotten through the terrific 2 years. Blaze was a generally quiet, creative little boy who could sit for periods of time building, drawing, and coloring. In playgroups, if no one would play with him, he would sulk and complain that he had no friends. But when my granddaughter came along, her mother threw out her parenting playbook. Aurora couldn't sit still for more than a few minutes at a time and was more like a bull in a china shop. In playgroups, she would engage just about every other child to become a part of her activity. Once, she had even turned a busy, chaotic public play area in a mall into a conga line she was at the head of. So how do you maintain parental sanity with polar opposite kids? With me on the show today is Karen Ribeiro, a development coach and author of the book Thirsty, Journaling to Survive, Thrive, and Feel Alive. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So it's a concept that parents don't often realize, because what they try to do is they say, well, this stuff worked fine with my other child. What's going on? There's something wrong with her.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have to get her analyzed, or we're going to have to
straightened out. Yeah.
Or maybe my discipline isn't strong enough,
mm-hmm.
and I'm going to have to, and sometimes parents they kind of give up after a couple of kids. But this is something that you work with parents with on a somewhat of a regular basis, right?
Yes, I have a parent-child coaching program. But the polar opposite terminology can sometimes sound like a good versus bad or an extreme kind of situation, but I'm also certified as a polarity management coach, and use a specific tool to identify the benefits of both polarities. Rather than a good versus a bad, we find the two different types of poles, like expressive versus reflective, or like active versus restful, humble versus confident. So there's the positive aspects of both poles, and then we work through and identify what the benefits of both are and what the limitations are if we go to extreme on any one of the poles. So this whole sophisticated mapping process, which is a very powerful process, but
and so we're going to show your website so people can get more information
mm-hmm.
to go there. But I think a lot of parents they end up getting frustrated. I know oftentimes parents will come to me and say, "Look, my firstborn child, she's excellent at soccer.
Mm-hmm.
Her brother would love to be like her, and all he does is says, I can't play as good as her."
Yes.
And parents get frustrated, and they come to me and go, "What do I tell her? What do I tell them?" But I think what we have to help them understand is, like you said, look at the positives.
Mm-hmm.
Focus on the positives and the strengths that child has based on the extreme differences with the sibling, correct?
Exactly. I have two polar opposite children, and they're so different, and it's important to help them to see the good in each other. And so one child didn't want me to read to him, or I can't remember actually which child didn't like me to read to them. They're teenagers now. And the other child loved reading. One child doesn't like to eat anything other than the hot dogs and macaroni and cheese, but the other will try anything you like, anything you'd present to her. So parents try different things. They try bribing them, and one time I remember bribing my son. We were at a wedding, and I said, "I'll give you $5 if you try this clam." And he wouldn't, if I gave him $50, he wasn't going to try the clam. But my daughter saw the opportunity. She reached across the table, grabbed the clam, put it in her mouth, and said, "Pay up the $5 because what's good for one is good for the other." But so you have to be creative with the techniques that you employ to help one understand the other, or shine the light or help them kind of meet the middle ground in their extremes.
I think it's really important for parents to relax over this and to, like we said before, focus on, first of all, owning up to accepting the child the way they are, not trying to force a round peg into a square hole, as they say.
Absolutely.
And I acknowledge a child for who he or she is, and focus on that child's strengths. And so what I try to help parents with is when they say, "What do I say to him when he says, it's not fair, Sarah plays soccer and I can't eat, I never get picked for it." I says, you know what, you're right, but what do you like to do? And redirect the focus on to help them understand that they are an individual with their own gifts and their own skills.
Exactly. And when I see when children who are polar opposites tend to pit one against the other, or you don't understand, or they start labeling each other or using what their strengths are as a negative of the other child, there are a few different things that we've tried and very successfully. One is having them sit on the floor knee to knee and say 5 good things about each other. And it gets them really thinking and reflecting on what goodness is in the other person. And so they have to dig deep, and sometimes as they get a little older you can say, well, you've used those 5 before, try a little harder, make sure that they're authentic, not the same 5 all the time. And that's been very helpful. But it is difficult with polar opposite children. And I find a lot of parents say that their 2 children are very extreme, they're very different, which is a nice challenge in parenting. It helps us to increase our patience and our communication skills and learn how to adapt, and it's all very good. But another thing that when they get really kind of triggered and they're starting name calling to each other, I love to I did this with my children, to have them tango. Because if they don't want to touch each other when they're upset, so you get them touching each other and doing backwards and forwards, and I'll say that dun dun dun, and I get them doing that early on. You can keep doing that through teenage years. My kids are both teenagers, and I still have them tango every once in a while if things are getting heated. So those are 2 really interesting techniques.
More than working with parents and children, you're also a life coach and a business coach as well. And you've got a book out called Thirsty, right?
Yep.
That I mentioned. You want to tell us a little bit about what we would get from that book?
Sure. This is a memoir. I have been a journal writer for many years, so I had a lot of material to put into this book, and it's really a transformative book from a negative outlook on life to a positive one. In it, I talk a lot about my husband and I. We have different cultural backgrounds and different parenting styles, and understanding each other's styles and resolving some of the challenges in that are in here, as well as including a lot of antics of my more active, expressive child. Like one time we were at Disney, and he didn't get 2 ice creams in a row. He wanted both ice creams, and we said, no, you're going to have just one. So he ran away in Disney in the middle of Magic Kingdom. And we were panicking, but I realized if thinking like him, what would I do? And I realized he'd want to see the whole thing go down. So, and he was 7, he had just turned 7. And when I realized that, I saw him at the opposite end of the Rotary area that we were at, and I was relieved, because you just have to think like your children. So there's a lot of antics in here about his toddler years and so forth.
Well, good.
Yeah.
Well, it's a concept that parents don't often think about, and our the whole initiative here, why we're doing this, is to bring more awareness to that, to let parents know that there are things that they can do, and having 2 totally different children, polar opposite kids, is absolutely normal.
Exactly.
So thank you for coming on the show, and wish the best for you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
How many times have you seen a young child having a meltdown in the grocery store? You're pushing your carriage along and then see a young child screaming to get out of the carriage, and the mother's embarrassed, angry, and at her wit's end. In my next segment, I'll be addressing this exact situation from an email sent to me by a viewer. Even if you don't have young children yourself, you may know someone who can use the help. So you want to stay tuned to hear my advice on this one. We'll be right back.